They say that curiosity killed the cat. But for her, curiosity became the door to a life she hadn't even realized she wanted. What do you do when passion fades and routine eats away at your marriage? Is it justified to look for fire where there shouldn't be any? This is the story of Grace, a woman who thought she was the perfect wife until one encounter turned her world upside down. Her husband, John, suspected nothing, but what happens when Grace crosses the line beyond which there is no return? Grace had never imagined that a single conversation could plant a seed of doubt so deep that it would take root and grow, reshaping the way she saw her life. Yet, there she was, standing in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, scrutinizing the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. She adjusted the hem of her dress, smoothing the fabric over her hips, then sighed. It had been years since she truly looked at herself this way. Her life with John had been steady, predictable, comfortable. 14 years of marriage had brought 2 children, a charming home in the Chicago suburbs, and a life built on routine. Mornings were a blur of preparing lunches, school drop-offs, and quick pecks on the cheek before rushing off to work. Evenings were spent between homework help, dinner preparations, and collapsing onto the couch in exhaustion. Their love had not disappeared, but it had dulled, settling into a rhythm that no longer made her pulse race. It wasn't until the monthly wine nights with her friends that Grace began to question the very foundation of her marriage. Those evenings were a mix of laughter, secrets, and confessions, each bottle of wine unlocking doors that would have otherwise remained closed. The women spoke freely, their voices laced with amusement and intrigue. One night, as they sat gathered around Cheryl's kitchen island, the conversation took a turn that left Grace unsettled. Cheryl leaned in, her voice low with mischief. "I never thought I'd be the type, but let me tell you, there is something about feeling wanted again. Really wanted." The other women giggled, clinking their glasses in understanding. Grace listened, intrigued but silent, as the stories unfolded. Stories of stolen kisses, whispered secrets, hotel rendezvous that none of their husbands knew about. These were women she saw every day, at school drop-offs, at PTA meetings, on grocery runs, and yet they had lives hidden beneath the surface, lives filled with passion and risk. The idea sat with Grace longer than she wanted to admit. It wasn't the betrayal that fascinated her, nor the secrecy. It was the hunger in their voices, the way they spoke about the thrill of being desired, of stepping outside the bounds of routine and feeling something electric. Had she been missing something all along? Had she convinced herself that contentment was enough? A week later, she found herself at the gym, a place she had not stepped into in years. She told herself it was about self-care, about reclaiming a part of herself that had been lost in the responsibilities of marriage and motherhood. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was curious. The gym was alive with energy, weights clanking, treadmills humming, music thumping in the background. Grace moved cautiously, feeling out of place in leggings that had not been worn in ages. She started on the elliptical, pretending to focus on the screen in front of her. But her gaze kept drifting across the room. And then she saw him. Travis moved with effortless confidence, his body honed and powerful, his presence magnetic. He wasn't just another personal trainer. He commanded the space around him. He laughed easily, his smile quick and disarming. Every time he spoke, the people around him leaned in, as if drawn to his orbit. Grace had never met him, had never exchanged a word with him, yet she felt an unfamiliar heat rush through her. She scolded herself for being ridiculous. She was a married woman, a mother, a person who had no business entertaining thoughts about a man who likely saw hundreds of women every day. And yet, the thought remained. Her routine at the gym became a ritual. 3 days a week, she arrived at the same time, easing into workouts that made her feel alive again. She avoided direct interaction with Travis, but she noticed him more than she cared to admit. The way his hands lingered just slightly when adjusting a client's posture, the way his voice dropped when he offered quiet encouragement. It wasn't intentional, not yet, but she was aware of him in a way she hadn't been aware of anyone in years. And then the moment came. One morning, As she struggled to adjust the settings on a weight machine, a shadow fell over her. She looked up to find Travis standing beside her, his expression easy and amused. "Need some help?" Her breath caught. Up close, he was even more striking. His skin gleamed under the overhead lights, his eyes sharp yet warm. Grace forced a laugh, nodding. "I think this machine is smarter than I am." He chuckled, stepping closer to show her how to adjust it. His fingers brushed hers as he guided her hands to the correct placement, his touch brief but electric. The air between them shifted, just slightly, enough to make her pulse quicken. She thanked him, and he gave her an easy smile before moving on, leaving her standing there with her thoughts tangled in a way they hadn't been before. That night, as she lay in bed beside John, she replayed the moment in her mind. It had been nothing, a simple exchange of friendly interaction, but it had ignited something inside her, something restless and insatiable. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come easily. The next time she saw Travis, it was different. He waved when she entered, an acknowledgement that sent a thrill through her. Their interactions became more frequent, small nods, casual greetings, moments that held no real significance, but felt charged nonetheless. She told herself it was harmless. A bit of attention, a bit of excitement, nothing more. But deep down, she knew she was playing with fire. As the days passed, she felt herself slipping into something she didn't quite understand. She dressed with more care, choosing outfits that made her feel attractive. She caught herself checking her phone more often, wondering if he had noticed her absence on the days she wasn't there. The gym was no longer just a place to work out. It was an escape, a world separate from the one where she was a wife and a mother. And then, one evening, Cheryl's words from that wine night came back to her. "I didn't realize how bored I was." Grace swallowed hard, the weight of realization settling over her. She had thought she was going to the gym to take care of herself. But now, she wasn't so sure. As she left that night, stepping out into the cool evening air, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about fitness anymore. It was about her, and it was only just beginning. Grace's morning routine hadn't changed, at least not on the surface. She still woke up early, prepared breakfast for her children, and kissed John goodbye before he left for work. Yet, beneath the familiar rhythm of her life, something had shifted. She moved through her days with an awareness that hadn't been there before, a heightened sense of self, a quiet thrill humming beneath her skin. The gym had become her sanctuary. It was no longer just a place for exercise, but an escape, a space where she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. She told herself that her growing anticipation for each visit was about self-improvement, about reclaiming a part of herself she had lost. But in truth, it was about him, Travis. The first time he had spoken to her, it had been casual, a simple exchange over gym equipment. But since then, their interactions had taken on a different energy. His presence lingered in her mind long after she had left, his voice replaying in her thoughts at odd moments throughout the day. The way he moved, the way he commanded attention without demanding it, it was magnetic. And she was drawn to it, whether she wanted to admit it or not. She began arriving earlier, hoping to catch glimpses of him before her workout. Sometimes, their exchanges were nothing more than a nod or a brief smile. Yet each one carried an unspoken weight. She studied his routine as much as her own, learning when he'd be with clients, when he'd take a break, when he'd glance across the gym and meet her eyes. Every look, every small interaction felt like fuel to a fire she wasn't sure she could control. One morning, as she pushed herself through her usual treadmill run, she felt a presence beside her. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Even with her pulse racing from exertion, she felt it spike when he spoke. "Pushing hard today." She nodded, keeping her breathing even, trying to keep up. It was nothing, just a few words exchanged in passing, but it settled into her chest like an ember, smoldering long after she had left the gym. That night, she sat across from John at the dinner table, watching as he scrolled through his phone between bites of food. The conversations they once had over dinner had grown shorter over the years, punctuated by routine questions about the kids, about work. It wasn't that he had changed. It wasn't even that she had changed. It was the space between them that had grown, the silence that had settled in so gradually she hadn't noticed until she had something to compare it to. When she went to bed, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of John's steady breathing beside her. She tried to convince herself that what she felt for Travis was nothing more than a passing attraction, something harmless that she could control. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. Days passed, and with each visit to the gym, she felt herself slipping further. It was in the way she adjusted her schedule to align with his, the way she lingered just a bit longer after her workouts, hoping for another fleeting conversation. It was in the way she started caring more about how she looked before she left the house, choosing outfits that made her feel attractive, even if she pretended it was just for herself. One afternoon, as she finished her last set of weights, she caught sight of Travis talking to another woman. She was younger, leaner, laughing at something he said. The sight of it sent an unexpected wave of something sharp through her, jealousy. It startled her, the intensity of it. She had no claim to him, no right to feel possessive. And yet she did. That evening, she found herself thinking about him in a way that made her uneasy. It wasn't just physical attraction anymore. It was the way he made her feel. Seen, appreciated, desired in a way she hadn't felt in years. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't want to let that feeling go. The next time she saw him, the atmosphere between them had changed. It wasn't dramatic, not overt, but it was there. A shift, a tension, a moment that lingered just a little too long. When their hands brushed as he handed her a towel, neither of them pulled away immediately. When he smiled at her, it felt like an invitation. Grace knew she was playing with fire. She knew she was inching toward a line that, once crossed, she could never return from. But in that moment, standing under the bright lights of the gym, feeling the pull between them grow stronger with every passing second, she wasn't sure she cared. And that realization terrified her more than anything. Grace moved through the following days in a haze, torn between the life she had built and the temptation pulling her in an entirely different direction. Each morning, she woke up next to John, their conversations reduced to routine exchanges about schedules and responsibilities. Yet, each day she spent at the gym, she felt herself slipping further into the gravitational pull of something forbidden. Her workouts became longer, though she barely noticed. It wasn't about the fitness anymore. It was about the anticipation, the moments that had grown heavier with unspoken meaning. She could feel the shift whenever Travis was near. He lingered longer when they spoke, held her gaze just a second too long. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. One afternoon, after finishing her workout, she sat in her car outside the gym, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her pulse was still racing, not from exertion, but from the electricity that lingered in the air between them. She ran her fingers through her hair, trying to shake the thoughts that had taken root in her mind. This was a mistake. She knew it. Yet knowing something and acting on it were two entirely different things. At home, she tried to throw herself back into routine. She planned family outings, cooked John's favorite meals, and even initiated conversation at dinner. But it felt forced, like playing a role rather than truly being present. John, ever absorbed in work and daily obligations, didn't seem to notice the difference. Or maybe he did, and he simply didn't know how to reach her anymore. The next time she saw Travis, the tension between them had deepened. It was no longer just fleeting glances or accidental touches. It was an awareness, a silent understanding that they were on the edge of something dangerous. When she walked into the gym that morning, she caught sight of him across the room. He was mid-conversation with another client, but the moment his eyes met hers, something unspoken passed between them. A pull, an invitation. She worked through her routine, trying to focus, but her mind kept replaying the way he looked at her. When she finally finished, she found herself hesitating before leaving. The logical part of her screamed to walk out the door, to put an end to whatever this was before it spiraled out of control. But she didn't listen. Instead, she found herself in one of the quieter areas of the gym, stretching, giving herself an excuse to stay just a little longer. And then, as if drawn by the same invisible force, Travis was there. "Pushing yourself today," he noted casually, but the weight behind his words made her chest tighten. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. For a moment, neither of them moved. The gym buzzed around them, machines whirring, weights clanking, people talking, but in that small pocket of space, it felt as if there were the only two people in the room. Grace knew she was on the edge of something irreversible, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to step back. Grace had always considered herself a woman of control, someone who understood boundaries and the weight of her own choices. But as the days blurred into nights, she found herself questioning how much of that control she had already surrendered. It wasn't a conscious decision, not at first. It was small things, allowing herself to linger at the gym a little longer, choosing outfits that made her feel confident, catching herself wondering if Travis would be there before she even pulled into the parking lot. Her home life remained unchanged, at least on the surface. She still performed her duties as a wife and mother with practiced ease. But there was a shift within her, a restlessness that had been stirred awake and refused to be ignored. She became hyper-aware of John's absence, even when he was present, of the way he barely looked up from his laptop during dinner, of the perfunctory goodnights, and the way their bed felt colder than it should. She told herself she was being unfair, that routine had dulled them both, but that excuse didn't quiet the storm brewing inside her. Each visit to the gym became a test of restraint, though she was losing the ability to convince herself she wanted restraint at all. Travis was careful, never overstepping, but there was an unspoken understanding between them now. It existed in the way his gaze lingered, the way he was always close enough to be noticed, but never too close to call attention. The game they were playing wasn't acknowledged out loud, but it was real nonetheless. One afternoon, she found herself alone in the weight area after most of the crowd had filtered out. She focused on her breathing, her posture, the mechanical rhythm of lifting and lowering, but she could feel his presence before she even saw him. He moved like he always did, calm, confident, as if he owned the space around him without effort. She knew she should get up and leave, that staying meant stepping deeper into something she wasn't sure she could walk away from. But she didn't move. He corrected her form once, a simple adjustment of her shoulders, his touch brief but charged. She exhaled shakily, focusing on the weight in her hands, but the warmth of his fingertips lingered far longer than they should have. It was a single moment, but it unraveled something inside her, making it impossible to pretend she wasn't standing at the edge of something dangerous. At home that evening, she went through the motions of dinner and bedtime routines, but her mind was elsewhere. She tried to analyze the depth of what she was feeling, but every thought looped back to the same realization. She was craving something more. Not just attention, not just desire, but the feeling of being seen. She hadn't realized how much she had missed it until it was given back to her in fleeting glances and whispered moments. John didn't notice the distance, or if he did, he chose not to acknowledge it. He kissed her goodnight without really looking at her, rolled onto his side, and fell asleep almost instantly. Grace lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her choices press against her ribs. She was losing herself to something she couldn't name, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stop,